When most people think of Star Citizen or space games in general, they imagine spaceships. Flying, landing, exploding, shooting, and other spaceship things. We think of planets, space stations, asteroids, and the ever-looming darkness that we'll never really know. But oftentimes we get stuck in a mindset that flying those spaceships is everybody's priority. And in this video, I'm going to make a case for the no-ship player. This is the first in my new YouTube series for supporters that analyzes the past, present, and overall design of Star Citizen, with a heavy emphasis on my personal opinion about the game. For more details on how to see these videos as soon as they're released to supporters, stick around until the end or check the links down below. To current supporters, thank you for making this possible. Many of you watching this video probably said, "Oh hey, that's me," as soon as they saw the title. But many more probably sympathize with the idea. Being a no-ship or no-fly player doesn't mean you never use board or fly ships in the game. It's simply somebody who's not primarily flying ships to experience the game. And believe it or not, a majority of players want to spend at least 50% of their time not even flying ships while they play. And I've got the data to back that up, I'll show you later. There is a range of players, from those who want to constantly be on their own 2 feet running crew responsibilities, to those who would like to fly their ship every day, but still get in time as an engineer when their friends are online. Then there are those who always will opt to fly themselves where they need to go, but then spend all their time at the destination running ground missions on their own 2 feet. The idea of playing at least extended segments without flying is a completely realistic idea for the future of Star Citizen. Star Citizen is a sim. Yes, it's approachable, especially compared to other flight sims, but it's still meant to carry enough depth in its mechanics to be stimulating to those looking for deep experience. And many of these types of mechanics are optional, depending on the playstyle and the goal of an individual. I believe that Star Citizen aims to make piloting ships one of these mechanics. Just look at what it takes to pilot a reclaimer out of atmosphere, or land a large ship in a cave. We don't have ships taking into account cargo mass and displacement, which will be part of cargo hauling, or thrusters responding to overheating systems as you stress your ship flying in atmosphere and trying to land very carefully with VTOL limitations because you don't have VTOL engines. We aren't experiencing malfunctions, more in-depth weather systems blowing us around, hazardous and toxic atmospheres, or more serious security requirements. As the game is right now, things are fairly easy to get around in a ship. So it's understandable to assume players in the future might not be as keen to always be flying. And since the persistent universe began, the main draw of the game has been the flight model and combat gameplay. Other than that, game mechanics have barely existed outside of fetch item missions and combat variations. There never was anything for players to do other than shoot at other players on other ships. So aside from being in a turret, what was the point of being on a multi-crew ship? Even though it may not seem like it, given what the game has offered in the past and still currently offers, no ship players are out there. I know, I did the research. I asked in a poll how players would want to spend their time in the future, whether on their own 2 feet running missions and getting involved in other types of gameplay, or piloting ships. And between Reddit, Twitter, and YouTube, obviously including for some overlap, the majority of participants said they'd like to spend 50% or more of their time doing things outside of the pilot seat. Many want to spend a large majority of their time. And this is all before Star Citizen has started to introduce these fancy mechanics into trailers and patch notes and updates to start drawing folks away from shooting and flying. There is a huge amount of industrial and science-based gameplay that's on the horizon, but also hasn't even started to be introduced to the players yet. We're talking about in-depth navigation, farming, base building, the logistics behind the economy, and obviously all that depth being added to locations. And these mechanics are the real reason so many backers want to play like this. From the ground up, Star Citizen is designed for them. I mean, just look at that initial expectation we talked about at the beginning of this video. When it comes to space games, we think of spaceships. So when a game comes around and draws so much focus to not spaceships, to interacting with the parts of spaceships, cities, and outposts with your own hands, they're making a statement. From the get-go, Star Citizen has pushed the idea of working on other ships, stations, cities, and planets, and as we see new features and locations develop, I believe this philosophy of no ship play, of living in Star Citizen without needing to be the pilot of a ship, is only going to continue. The options these players who do not want to pilot ships have are still pretty sparse, but the features supporting them are increasing with every single patch, and have been for some time. All the way back in 3.15, inventories and medical gameplay created new roles for players in groups. While they weren't the best implementations and need some work going forward, the ability to loot bunkers and take on more responsibilities than just shooting the derp AI made for a wider variety of fun. 3.16 actually being a bit like 3.19 was pretty light and didn't do much for us, but 3.17 was a good patch cycle for the crewmen. With all the new ground locations and the new derelicts, there were many more reasons to get transported somewhere, but not necessarily need to fly. While very rarely used at the time of writing in April, refueling was also added at this time as a new industrial game loop. And hopefully more commonly used after upcoming mining improvements, mining gadgets provided a new opportunity to assist mining operations from first person without being in the pilot seat. Of course, most of us know the change that 3.18 made to gameplay like this, ushering in the cargo refactor and introducing the salvage mechanic through hull scraping. Of all those players who want to play the game without flying ships, the changes in 3.18 made the pirates, industrial players, and the mercenaries quite happy. We also saw the addition of even more ground-based missions and locations to entice players out of the cockpit as well. And now we are in the lead up to 3.19, with once again several more features pushing players to explore new interactions and game mechanics. The long-awaited addition of physical components may introduce the game to weapons dealers, component repair people, and pseudo-engineer activities. It also could make the option to trade out mining bags possible. Speaking of mining, a refresh along with 2 new materials seems to aim at drawing players back to multi-crew and ground-based industrial gameplay. Seeing updates to both mining and salvage in a single patch is very good news for our no-ship players. And there are also new ground missions in dozens of new derelict locations coming in the patch, Orison, and the large Reclaimer derelict site on Microtech. Now, I'm naming all of these gameplay components not because they're introducing massive changes in gameplay, but because every one of these small changes adds to that ability for a no-ship player to go no-ship. And new missions aren't a particularly unique draw to crew gameplay, let's be honest. So ignoring that, we still have a few more major features in development that will build on this gameplay coming out in the future. Engineering has been shown to be a major form of gameplay on larger ships, and even a possible nuisance on smaller ones. The cargo refactor continues with larger cargo capacities, physical ship loading, which will all demand more manpower to move less commodities. Building interiors aim to vastly expand landing zones and incorporate more gameplay into the central hubs. The upcoming UGF and outpost reworks are centered on a scale much larger than the current iterations, clearly focused on more expansive missions and gameplay opportunities. More iterations of refueling, salvage, and repair gameplay will continue to introduce new mechanics that require more players on ships together. AI getting more interactive and hopefully after server meshing, more responsive will also pull players out of ships and into population centers and POIs to interact more. Even the bounty hunting profession is taking a turn more towards apprehending and turning in a criminal, rather than just flying around shooting folks 100% of the time. You may end up flying your ships less than you think you will. And what I've named here is only what we know about and what I could think of at the moment. But if you look through the progress tracker, there are a lot of small features that will continue to add to this draw for players to take a step out of the cockpit and start interacting more with the world around them. The message is clear as day. Star Citizen is aiming to be a space game with an emphasis on ships, but not a spaceship game. And while things like NPC crew and AI blades may help players handle some of these jobs while they pilot their ships, the overall direction seems to point towards a less flight-focused future for most players. This ultimately means the game is going to play a lot differently in the future. That's not a surprise, we've talked about it in recent videos, and it's apparent enough given how much the game changes. But I don't think players should sleep on these statistics. As I said before, the most likely time for the game to push you towards flying a ship is always now, because as we move forward, we're always moving towards a less flight-focused future. So I only expect these percentages to go up. I've actually been putting this question to the test myself. I created a new character in Star Citizen which I've used to play with select days over the last month with one simple rule. I can't fly any ships. From the outset, this doesn't seem so bad. As I've pointed out, there's already plenty to do for somebody who doesn't want to fly. But on my first day, I dealt with some of the most frustrating social experiences in the game thus far, as I fought to convince folks to just trust me and work with me. I've been publishing these gameplay sessions edited over on my second channel and streaming them live to this channel if you want to come join. But the hardest part of it all has been getting transportation to new places to work or meet up with others to work with. Everything in Star Citizen is constructed with immense scale, and given the lack of density I mentioned towards the beginning of this video, it is currently just too hard to be in the right place anywhere close to the right time if you don't have a readily available ship to get you where you need to go. So, what does that mean for Star Citizen? Well, for one, the social expectations of players will need to shift immensely. Not only will players need to be reassured of personal responsibility enough to trust other players on their ships, players will need to be able to assign more robust transportation missions to others. Currently, every player is expected to fly around at all times, so nobody believes you just need a ride. And honestly, if you tell a player you want to meet at a space station and then tell them you need a ride, chances are they're not going to want to fly across the system to get you. Star Citizen is expected to feature a 9:1 AI to human ratio in part because of this. Being able to catch a ride from one location to another without a ship will need to be an easy option for players as well in order to properly support this kind of gameplay. And while players are en route, we need more things to do. Quantum travel speed has actually been increased, I believe, due to the lack of things to do, maintain, and complete during downtime. With things like the actor status system, ship engineering, proper navigation, and inventory management, we can see this aspect improving, but a lot more will be needed to convince players to sit on a ship while they fly for 15 minutes. Finally, of course, the underlying gameplay will need to expand a ton. But they know this. We can see this from the effort put into new caves, new cities, new underground facilities, new outposts, asteroid facilities, space stations, river valleys, and all these other locations coming in. The explosion in locations we've seen recently will need to keep pace with planets, moons, missions, NPCs, and activities in those locations as well. These things are pretty obvious and more easily said than done though. But from what we are seeing, I think the game is on the right track. And that's the important thing here. I did not get close to talking about all the ways the game needs to change or will change to shift more players to non-flight gameplay. But everywhere you look, you can see them, which means we are headed in the right direction. And while this video is about the kind of player who just never wants to fly the ship, the core of the message here is focused at all Star Citizen players. Because while it's important to get that flight experience right, we also need to make sure there's plenty for players to do while we're not flying. So what comes next after this is seeing how the community is going to adapt to it. I hope you enjoyed this video. It's a topic I'm passionate about because, believe it or not, I've never really liked spaceship flight games. I played some X-Wing and other Star Wars games as a kid, but as a heavily story and character-driven RPG console gamer nerd most of my life, I'm pretty hyped for immersive game systems, good storytelling, and interacting with a lot of environments. Star Citizen seems like the perfect sci-fi game to make my own story with those caveats, and I couldn't be happier to see how many others feel the same. If you enjoyed this more opinionated take than my usual stuff, check out the linked resources below to see how you can become a supporter and get one of these 6 months before everyone else every month. Anyways, I hope this one got you thinking a little bit, and I hope to see you in the next.